welcome back, everyone. We're going to be diving into some pretty intense stuff today. Donald Trump's return to the presidency in 2025. We all follow the news cycle and everything, but we're going a little bit deeper today with this. We're looking at an analysis by Professor Jorge Majfud. He's written a ton on U.S. politics, global power dynamics, and his article, Augustulo Trump, is giving us some serious food for thought here.
Yeah, one of the things that's really striking about Majfud's work is that he goes beyond just like the typical political commentary. Like he's really placing Trump's presidency within like a much larger historical context. And he's drawing these like parallels with Roman emperors to kind of try to understand what this could all mean for the U.S. and for the world, really.
Okay, so Roman emperors, you definitely have my attention. But honestly, like when I first saw that title, I was like, is he saying that Trump is going to create like a new golden age, or is he saying that Trump is going to lead America to its downfall? Like it just felt very dramatic.
Yeah, it is a bold comparison, no doubt. And Majfud is focusing on two emperors in particular. So we've got Augustus, who, ushered in the Roman Empire. And then we've got Augustulus, who was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. And, the question that Majfud is posing is whether Trump's presidency is going to kind of mirror aspects of both.
Okay. So how does Trump compare to Augustus? Like they seem like wildly different figures.
Yeah.
Separated by like thousands of years.
Right. Yeah. And, Majfud points out that both of them, both Augustus and Trump, they rose to power during these like times of intense social unrest and upheaval. And both of them were like masters of, populist rhetoric, promising a return to this perceived like past greatness, right? Think make America great again. It's tapping into that same longing for a more glorious past.
So it's about tapping into that like
Oh, yeah.
emotional undercurrent of, nostalgia and discontent. But, Augustus didn't exactly have Twitter to spread his message.
That's true. That's true. He didn't have Twitter. But he did have his methods, right? I mean, Augustus very skillfully used symbols, like the golden eagle, and he invoked like traditional Roman values to kind of consolidate his power. He also, strategically weakened institutions like the Senate. And Majfud is arguing that, we're seeing echoes of this in how Trump has interacted with institutions like the media, the judiciary, even the electoral process itself.
So it's not just about like the personality or even the rhetoric, but it's more about the strategies they employed to amass power. That's a pretty unsettling connection when you think about it.
Yeah, it does. It does make you pause and consider, the potential long-term consequences, doesn't it? And, Majfud doesn't stop there. He goes on to argue that the American empire, despite its, it might be remarkably short-lived.
Short-lived compared to the Roman Empire lasted for centuries.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Majfud is comparing the U.S. to. He's comparing it to, both the Roman Empire in Europe and then also the Eastern Roman or, Byzantine Empire, which both endured for far longer. And he's seeing the rising power of China as a major factor in this potential decline.
Well, that brings up like the whole Thucydides trap concept, right? Where a rising power clashes with the existing dominant one. So is Majfud suggesting that we are headed for like inevitable conflict with China?
Well, he doesn't, state it as an absolute certainty, but he definitely highlights the potential for conflict. And he links this to what he calls the Anglo-Saxon obsession with global dominance. And he argues that this mindset, makes it very difficult to accept the rise of any other power.
So it's like the U.S. might be like struggling with all these internal issues while also facing all this external pressure from a rising China. It's like being squeezed from both sides.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And Majfud doesn't, shy away from critiquing the U.S.'s internal problems either. He points to things like, rising poverty, addiction, violence, social unrest as signs of, a deeper malaise. And he sees this like contradiction in the U.S. promoting itself as like this model of success while grappling with these, very real issues.
Just like clinging to, this outdated image while the reality on the ground is telling a very different story.
Precisely, yeah. And this leads to, another one of Majfud's key arguments. He suggests that the U.S. has historically tried to suppress any successful model that deviates from its own system of corporate capitalism.
So any country that tries to achieve success through a different system is seen as a threat.
That's his point. And he sees China's success as a communist country within, a capitalist world order as a direct challenge to this narrative. And he's particularly critical of the idea that China's success is due to state capitalism, arguing that there are fundamental differences in how corporate and government power function in each system.
So we're kind of seeing this clash of ideologies play out on this global scale with China's economic success challenging the U.S.'s long-held belief in its own model's superiority.
Exactly. And it's within this context, right, of a shifting global landscape and a U.S. grappling with these internal challenges that Trump returns to power. And that brings us to perhaps the most unsettling part of Majfud's analysis.
Yeah, and this is where those Roman emperor comparisons get really interesting.
Yes. And Majfud argues that that Trump's rise and the rise of, nationalist politics in general has profoundly disrupted traditional narratives about democracy and freedom. And he suggests that, even those on the right are starting to recognize that the American system is deeply flawed.
So there's this growing disillusionment, a sense that the American dream is kind of fading and that the system itself is rigged against them.
That's precisely what Majfud is getting at. And he highlights 6 obviedades, which translate to, obvious truths that he believes are gaining traction among, a growing segment of the population.
Okay, well, let's unpack these obvious truths. What's the first one?
So the first one is that appeals to patriotism are often used to stifle dissent and maintain the status quo. So basically, questioning the government or its actions, is labeled unpatriotic, even if those actions are, harmful or unjust.
So it's basically a way of shutting down debate and holding on to power, regardless of the consequences.
Exactly, yeah. And the second obvious truth kind of builds on this. It centers on the outsized influence of corporations, suggesting that the U.S. is less a true democracy and more of a system where wealthy elites and corporations hold sway.
So it's more like an oligarchy masquerading as a democracy.
Yeah, that's the argument that Majfud is making. He's saying that people are starting to see how corporate lobbying and campaign donations, distort the political process, allowing a small, wealthy elite to wield this disproportionate power.
Okay, so what about the third obvious truth?
So this one challenges the idea that, privatizing everything is the solution to all of our problems.
Yeah.
And people are starting to see the downsides of privatization, from rising costs and declining quality of services to a lack of accountability.
Okay, so we've got, patriotism being used as a tool for control. We've got corporate power kind of overwhelming democratic processes. And we've got the limits of privatization being exposed. What's the fourth obvious truth that the Majfud identifies?
Yeah, so this one kind of delves into, the darker side of U.S. power, specifically the actions of agencies like the NSA and the CIA. And Majfud is pointing to things like, the Snowden revelations, drone strikes, ongoing wars in the Middle East.
So it's about acknowledging that, the U.S. government might be engaging in activities that frankly violate human rights and international law, all in the name of, national security.
Yes. And this ties into the fifth obvious truth, which is a breakdown of, the consensus about the U.S.'s role as this benevolent force in the world.
People are starting to question whether the U.S. is really a force for good in the world.
Exactly. And, Majfud is citing growing criticism of U.S. foreign policy, from its support of Israel's occupation of Palestine to its interventions in Latin America. He mentions protests against, U.S. military interventions, economic sanctions, support for authoritarian regimes.
Yeah, he even mentions, specific examples like protesters calling out Senator Marco Rubio, who was just, reappointed as Secretary of State as a bloodthirsty warmonger, or former soldiers yelling at Antony Blinken, who's been in and out of that same role, about spending money on bombing children in Gaza instead of helping people here at home.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of this growing dissent and this questioning of the U.S.'s role in global affairs, doesn't it? And then finally, the sixth obvious truth revolves around the corrupting influence of money in politics. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that we hear a lot about, but Majfud really puts it in stark terms, doesn't he? He specifically calls out, the Israeli lobby AIPAC and its influence on U.S. policy in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
He even quotes Senator Bernie Sanders saying that most Americans don't want to support a government that that kills children, but politicians are afraid to speak out because they'll lose funding from groups like AIPAC.
It's a pretty sobering assessment of how, money can warp the political process and silence dissent.
It's like the system itself is set up to, prioritize the interests of the wealthy and powerful over the needs of the people.
That's the point that Majfud is driving home, and it's against this backdrop of disillusionment and growing awareness of these obvious truths that he sees a new and potentially radical force emerging.
You're talking about the emergence of a more radical left-right. He mentions this alongside the rise of the far right.
Exactly. Majfud argues that as the far right gains political power, there's this simultaneous emergence of a more radical left that's fueled by the very disillusionment that we've been discussing.
So what's driving this radicalization on the left?
Well, he uses the phrase "coming out of the closet" about the reality of class struggle. It's like people are finally waking up to the fact that the system is rigged against them, that the wealth gap is widening, and that their needs are being ignored.
So it's not just about like tweaking the system anymore. It's about demanding like fundamental change, a realignment of power.
Precisely. And Majfud sees this as potentially significant, perhaps marking a shift away from traditional political paradigms.
Okay, so we've got this like complex interplay of a declining U.S., a rising China, a disillusioned populace, and the rise of both like extreme right and radical left movements.
Yeah.
Where does Trump fit into all of this, especially in his second term?
Yeah, that's where Majfud's analysis takes a turn towards the unsettling. He describes, Trump's return to power as an Augustulus moment.
Hold on. We need to unpack that. What exactly does he mean by Augustulus moment?
Right. So remember Augustulus, the last Roman emperor. Majfud is drawing a parallel here, suggesting that instead of ushering in a new era of American greatness, Trump's presidency could actually mark the beginning of the end for the American empire.
Wow. That's not exactly a hopeful outlook.
No, it's not. And Majfud argues that that Trump's policies, his rhetoric, his entire approach to leadership actually exacerbate the trends that are already undermining the U.S.'s global standing.
He's referring to things like the trade wars, the isolationist policies, the attacks on democratic institutions.
Exactly. Yeah. Majfud sees these as accelerating the U.S.'s decline, pushing it down a path of self-destruction.
Okay, so far this deep dive has been pretty intense. We've got these historical parallels with Roman Empire, the rise of China, the decline of the U.S., these obvious truths, and the emergence of these radical movements on both ends of the political spectrum. And now we're looking at Trump's return to power through this lens of potential decline. This is a lot to take in.
It is.
And it raises so many questions about what this means for the future of the U.S. and the world. But that's a conversation for part 2 of our deep dive.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but I can already tell there's much more to explore. So stay tuned, listeners, because we're about to go even deeper.
So as we kind of delve deeper into Majfud's analysis, it's important to remember that he's not just some commentator on current events, right? He spent years studying the historical forces that have shaped, our world.
Right. And his book, The Wild Frontier, 200 Years of Anglo-Saxon Fanaticism in Latin America, really sheds light on some of the patterns that he's identifying in his analysis of Trump and the U.S.'s current trajectory.
Exactly. And in The Wild Frontier, Majfud examines what he calls Anglo-Saxon fanaticism, and he traces it back 200 years. And he argues that it's rooted in this belief in Anglo-Saxon superiority and this relentless pursuit of power and control. And he sees this mindset as having fueled, colonialism, imperialism, and countless conflicts throughout history.
So this isn't just about Trump or even the U.S. in isolation. It's about like a much broader historical pattern of behavior, right? A way of thinking that's been influencing global politics for centuries.
That's precisely Majfud's point. He sees this same mindset at play in the U.S.'s current approach to global affairs. Its resistance to China's rise, its interventions in the Middle East, its attempts to control, Latin America. He argues that these are all manifestations of this, deep-seated fanaticism.
That's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah.
Like connecting these seemingly disparate events across time and geography. But if we look back at history, there are definitely patterns of intervention and dominance, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the narratives we've been told about, progress and the U.S.'s role in the world.
Exactly. Majfud is challenging us to think critically about those narratives, and it reminds me of another article that he wrote back in 2002, "The Slow Suicide of the West." It seems like he was already kind of exploring some of these themes, back then.
What did he say in that article?
Well, he argues that the West's, obsession with power and control, its exploitation of other cultures and resources, could ultimately lead to its own downfall. He sees the current challenges facing the U.S. As part of a larger historical process, like a reckoning with the consequences of his own actions.
So the seeds of decline were sown long ago, and we're now kind of seeing the consequences, play out. That's pretty sobering thought. But how does all of this connect back to Trump's second term? How does Majfud see things unfolding under his leadership?
Well, he paints a rather bleak picture, using that term Augustulus moment to describe Trump's return to power. He's suggesting that Trump's presidency could mark the beginning of the end for the American empire.
So instead of making America great again, Trump might actually preside over its decline.
That's what Majfud seems to be suggesting. He argues that Trump's policies, the trade wars, the isolationism, the attacks on democratic norms, are exacerbating the very trends that are undermining the U.S.'s position in the world.
So it's like he's speeding up the decline, not reversing it.
Exactly. And remember those obvious truths that we talked about. The disillusionment, the distrust in institutions, the sense that the system is rigged. All of that creates fertile ground for a leader like Trump to exploit.
Right. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? The problems create the conditions for a leader who then makes the problems worse. But what about those radical movements that Majfud mentioned? Could they offer any hope for change, any alternative to this downward spiral?
Right. That's the question, isn't it? And Majfud acknowledges the potential for these movements, both on the left and the right, to challenge the status quo and push for radical change.
But he doesn't seem overly optimistic about their chances of success.
No, he's cautious. He doesn't offer, any easy answers or predictions. He leaves us with this sense of uncertainty. Of a world at a crossroads,
Yeah.
where the future is very much up for grabs.
So Majfud's analysis isn't exactly comforting, is it? It's challenging, it's thought-provoking, and at times, pretty unsettling. It makes you wonder, where do we go from here?
It does,
Yeah.
but I think that's the point. He's not trying to, provide a roadmap or predict the future. He's encouraging us to think critically, to question the narratives that we've been told, and to engage with these complex issues.
He wants us to be, active participants in shaping the future, not passive bystanders watching it unfold.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key takeaway from Majfud's analysis. He talks about the emergence of a new generation that's more aware of the challenges that we face, more critical of the status quo, and perhaps more willing to demand, real change.
You mean the generation that's grown up with climate change, economic inequality, and political polarization as defining features of their reality. They don't have the same rose-tinted glasses about the American dream that previous generations might have.
Precisely, yeah. And Majfud sees this as a potential source of hope.
Yeah.
He argues that this generation isn't afraid to call out injustice, to fight for equality, and to demand action. They're pushing us all to think differently, to act differently, to be better.
And maybe that's the silver lining in all of this, right? Despite the bleak outlook that challenges the potential for decline, there's still hope that this new generation can break free from the patterns of the past and create a more just and sustainable future.
It's a powerful message, isn't it? Even in the face of what sometimes feels like overwhelming darkness, there's still that flicker of light.
Yeah. And maybe that flicker is all we need to keep moving forward. It's a reminder that we're not powerless, that change is possible, and that the future is still being written.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to acknowledge that this hope isn't a passive thing. It requires action, engagement, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
That's a great point. It's not enough to just, hope for a better future. We have to actively work towards it.
Exactly. And that means, engaging with the ideas that Majfud presents, having those difficult conversations, questioning our own assumptions, and holding our leaders accountable.
So this deep dive isn't just about understanding the past or analyzing the present. It's about empowering ourselves to shape the future.
I think that's a great way to put it. We're not just observers of history. We're active participants. And Majfud's analysis, while challenging, can be a catalyst for action, for change, for creating a world that's more just, more equitable, and more sustainable.
Well said. Well said. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to take a moment to focus on one specific aspect of Majfud's analysis that I found particularly thought-provoking. So, throughout this deep dive into Majfud's work, there's been this underlying tension between like decline and the potential for renewal, right? Like he paints a pretty stark picture of the challenges facing the U.S., but he also kind of hints at the possibility of a different path forward.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most crucial aspects of his analysis lies in his focus on shifting perspectives. Remember, those 6 obvious truths that we discussed, those represent a significant departure from, traditional narratives about the U.S. and its role in the world.
Right. Those truths highlight a growing disillusionment with the American dream, a sense that the system is rigged, and a questioning of the U.S.'s actions on the global stage. It's a far cry from the narrative of American exceptionalism that we've often been told.
Exactly. And Majfud argues that this shift in perspective is more than just a passing phase. He sees it as a fundamental change in how people, particularly younger generations, are viewing the world.
It's like they're seeing through the facade, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing the contradictions between the ideals that the U.S. claims to uphold and the reality of its actions, both domestically and internationally.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And this recognition, this disillusionment is fueling a desire for something different, something better.
So what does that something different look like? Does Majfud offer any like concrete solutions or alternatives?
Well, he doesn't, lay out a step-by-step plan, but he does point toward the potential of, these emerging movements, both on the left and the right, to challenge the status quo. He suggests that this growing awareness of systemic problems could lead to a demand for more fundamental change.
He talks about people, coming out of the closet, about the reality of class struggle. Is he suggesting that a more class-conscious movement could emerge, one that transcends traditional political divides?
Yeah, that seems to be what he's hinting at. He sees this potential for a realignment of power, a shift away from the corporate interests that have dominated the political landscape for so long.
But isn't that a pretty radical proposition?
Yeah.
Can you really imagine such a fundamental shift happening in a system that seems so entrenched?
I mean, it's definitely a tall order, but Majfud's analysis reminds us that systems aren't static, right? They evolve, they adapt, and sometimes they undergo radical transformations.
Like think about like the fall of the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
The French Revolution, the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa. History is full of examples of seemingly unchangeable systems being overthrown or fundamentally altered.
Yeah, exactly. And while Majfud doesn't, offer any guarantees, he does leave us with a sense of possibility, of agency. He reminds us that we're not just passive bystanders. We have the power to shape the future.
And that power starts with awareness, right? With understanding the forces at play and with engaging in these difficult conversations. That's what we've tried to do in this deep dive, to kind of delve into the complexities of our current moment and explore the potential paths ahead.
Yeah, it's been a thought-provoking journey, hasn't it? From the the historical parallels to the rise and potential fall of empires, from the disillusionment with the American dream to the emergence of new movements challenging the status quo.
Majfud's analysis has definitely given us a lot to chew on, and I hope it's inspired you, our listener, to continue exploring these ideas and to consider your own role in shaping the future.
Remember, even in the face of uncertainty and daunting challenges, there's always hope. Hope that we can learn from the mistakes of the past, hope that we can create a more just and sustainable future, and hope that we can build a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
And that hope starts with each of us. It starts with being informed, with engaging in these conversations, with challenging our own assumptions, and with demanding better from our leaders and from ourselves.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.
Yeah, absolutely. And take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.